testimonies, as discipleship, as we listen to Mark and Jerry. May we hear the words that they both speak, but also remember in the background that it is Christ that loved us first to put us on this journey in this world, in this walk of each and every one of our lives. So Mark DeBlock, please share your discipleship and your testimony.
One wonders sometimes how you get into certain circumstances, and I'm wondering that now. Apparently, you could not self-nominate for this particular role. Somebody else would nominate you. No matter how hard I tried, Pastor wouldn't reveal which one of you did this. Pastor had 6 questions he wanted each of us who are doing this to answer. And I'm going to answer those 6 questions, but I'm going to talk about 3 individuals who played a significant role in my life and my spiritual development. The first person is my father. He was a Lutheran pastor. And so I grew up in a Christian family. I went to church and Sunday school each week. And I learned over the years that my father had 2 significant strengths. I mention these strengths now because they had a significant impact on me. The first strength is he was a peacemaker. He was known to go to troubled churches where there was infighting and where people who may have sat in the same church every Sunday, but they were not speaking to each other. His colleagues would ask him, "Why on earth are you going there?" However, by the time he left that church to go to another, the wounds were healed and the church was as it should be, at peace. The second strength my father had was he was a counselor. Marriage counseling, family issues, relationship issues, faith issues. He was able to work with people and get them the relational healing they needed. He told me once that people often expect more out of counselors than what counselors are able to give. People want to lay their problems out in front of the counselor and then expect the counselor to provide all the answers. My father gave this example of what counseling is like. He said, "Go to the library, select a book, one you have never read or heard anything about. Make sure it's a large book. Open it to the middle and start reading. Read about 50 pages. Have you figured out the plot? How well do you know the characters in the book?" That's what it's like to counsel people, except people are far more complex than books. Counseling, my dad told me, is about tools. You need to assess what tools the other person needs and provide them with the tools so they are equipped to solve their own problems and find their own solutions. I want to tell you a bit about myself now in my early years. Although I was immersed in the culture of the church, faith for me was not automatic. In fact, as a teenager, I wasn't sure God existed. Don't get me wrong, I wanted God, the God of the Bible, to exist. I wanted the stories of Jesus to be true. But how could I be certain? How could I prove it? I needed facts. I needed evidence. There was another person who needed facts. Remember Thomas? One of the disciples of Jesus, often referred to as Doubting Thomas. Every time you hear the word Thomas, you think Doubting Thomas. Jesus had been crucified and risen again, and he visited his disciples, and for whatever reason, Thomas wasn't present. John 20:24 says, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails have been and put my hand into his side, I will never believe." Now, in my opinion, Thomas has gotten a bad rap. I identify with him. I'm glad Jesus chose Thomas as one of the 12. Continuing at verse 26. 8 days later, his disciples were once again inside the doors locked, and Thomas was with them. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then Jesus said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Reach your hand out and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Now here's the wonderful thing, that although Thomas doubted, Jesus took the time to give Thomas what he needed. My doubts about God's existence became a phobia for me. I had trouble sleeping. I had feelings of terror, of nothingness upon death. As Jesus gave Thomas what he needed, so my dad took the time to give me what I needed to strengthen my faith. Remember, I had a live-in counselor. When I had trouble sleeping, my dad would often stay up with me and we'd talk. The biggest stumbling block was my need for evidence. One night we were sitting in the living room with the drapes on the large window pulled back. I had just explained to my dad, yet again, how I was missing facts, evidence. My dad went to the picture window and asked me to join him. It was a clear night. The moon and the stars were shining brightly. He pointed to the house across the street and he said, "Who built that house?" We talked about that and came up with a list: plumbers, electricians, carpenters, bricklayers. Then he asked, "How do you know that? Were you there? Did you see the workmen? How can you be sure?" He turned all my questions back onto me. You see, I already believed things that I didn't have all the facts on. Then he pointed to a tree in our front yard, to the moon, to the stars, and he asked, "Who made those?" I found this verse sometime later, and it speaks of this. It says, For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. From what has been made. So people are without excuse. Years later, I saw the truth of this in my place of employment. As a mechanical engineer, I worked with other mechanical engineers. We would share experiences. We would consult each other when we came across a particularly difficult problem. Even so, we each had our own styles. I could walk through manufacturing and see a motor, a shaft, or some other part, and know by looking at it who designed it. I could say, Ken designed that, Jim designed that, Greg designed that. I could see the designer through what had been made. The same could be said of like pictures. People can look at a picture and they can say, I know who the artist is. One of my favorite songs is How Great Thou Art, which talks about seeing the greatness of God through his creation. And I like the first verse in particular. The second is still very good, but I like the first one. O Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hand has made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee, how great thou art. The second person that had a significant impact in my life was a fellow by the name of Paul Phelan. Paul was a senior engineer when I joined GE Peterborough in 1979. He was my mentor in that he was my role model in learning how to design rotating electrical equipment. But he was more than just a technical example to me. Paul and his wife Lillian introduced Diane and me to Marriage Encounter, a weekend seminar for married couples to teach and provide communication tools. This seminar took place in the early 1980s, and I believe it has had a lasting impact on our marriage. Paul was also one of the most gentlest, forgiving persons I have ever known. He was soft-spoken and used as few words as possible to convey his thoughts. On occasion, I would witness or hear someone treat Paul poorly. His response would be, they must be dealing with something in their life to make them act that way. Me, on the other hand, wanted to say to him that they were just being a jerk. Of course, I never said that to him out of respect, but I've come to realize that Paul's response is often the correct one. Paul made allowance for the shortcomings of others and thought positively about them, more than perhaps they deserved. Paul was very gentle when it came to providing correction or discipline. Early in our friendship, he recognized the poor conversational habit of mine, which I'm not going to tell you about. One day I walked into my office to find a magazine article on my desk with his distinctive initials on it. He did not hide the fact that it was him providing me with the article. The article addressed the specific poor habit I was exhibiting. I read the article and recognized myself and realized that I had a poor habit. Paul taught me about gentleness, having a forgiving heart, and being gentle with others when they need correction. I haven't achieved the standard he demonstrated, let alone the standard Jesus showed us, but I'm still working on it. The third and final mentor I want to talk about is really a group of mentors. Many of you are my mentors. That's why I attend this church. I see in many of you attributes which I desire to have more of. Galatians 5:22 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." I would say to young and old alike, take a personal inventory of which of these characteristics you have, and take special note of which you are lacking. Find someone you know that exhibits the characteristics and get to know them. Find out how they do it and learn from them. Philippians 4:8 says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on such things." One of the Bible verses from VBS, for those of you who attended, that was Thursdays. How often do you find yourself thinking about negative thoughts? Don't get me wrong, negative things happen in life. That's reality. But we are not to allow negative to rule us. The verse tells us to make a conscious decision to immerse our mind in positive things. You've heard it said, you are what you eat. Likewise, what we put in our minds makes us who we are. You've probably all heard this. Be careful of your thoughts, for your thoughts become words. Be careful of your words become actions. Be careful of your actions, for your actions become your habits. Be careful of your habits become your character. Be careful of your character, for your character becomes your destiny. Thank you.